Hello and welcome to today's Knowledge Bank, Building Safety Management. This afternoon's session is brought to you by James Purdey, Operations Manager at Foresight Consulting. If you have any questions throughout the session today, please submit them via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and James will try to get through as many as possible at the end. Today's session is being recorded, so if anyone cannot watch the session live or you just want to watch it back again later today, that will be available, and I will email across that to all the attendees with a copy of today's slides. I will now pass you over to James to begin the session.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, good afternoon. I'm James from Foresight Consulting. As Vicky was saying, I'm the operations manager at the company. So what we're going through today is a little bit of a background information and what you can look forward to from the Building Safety Bill, which is currently going through Parliament. So there are still going to be amendments to it, and there are proposals coming out every day, including some which will be coming out next week, which may affect what I'm saying today, and it may change what that's doing. So this is as it is now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go through then is why it's being introduced. If you can have a look on the timeline there, I appreciate it's quite a busy slide, although, as Vicky said, you will get the slides later, so you can have a look at that. The first thing really is, prior to Grenfell, is in 2009, there was the Lacanau house fire in South London. 6 people were killed, and there were at least 20 were injured in that. And that was a fire spread through a high-rise block. It did have cladding installed on it, but there were other fire safety issues within it that caused that fire to spread quickly throughout and caused those fatalities. The next thing we had then after that was in 2009, is then in 14th of June in 2017, there was the Grenfell Tower disaster. 72 people died and there were over 70 injured, okay? And that was in a 24-story block. That really brought home the issues that were apparent from building safety. This is coming from when they were first initially constructed, going through all the planning phase, going into the construction phase, and then going into the occupation as well. So there were changes made on the building. Cladding was installed on it, which was flammable, so it was combustible, which then there was a kind of a perfect storm that happened on that evening that caused the tragedy that then happened to Grenfell. Through that then, we went through a series of advice notes, and there was a report that was going to be done to ensure that it would change what was happening with building safety, and there was a review of the building regulations. The Grenfell Tower reports, Grenfell Inquiry Phase 1 report was in 2019, and as you may know, that's still going on today with other phases. Okay, and they made, with that, then there were changes to the building regulations, and even further advice notes came out until the 20th of January 2020, when the consolidated advice note was issued by the government. This ensured that all buildings of any height, or multiple occupancy buildings of any height, which had some kind of external wall system installed on it, be that balconies or some other kind of cladding on there, would need to be assessed for fire safety. This is now has changed in the last month, where there has been new guidance issued. However, that was in place from January 2020. There was a new fire safety bill was announced after that, on the 19th of March 2020, which became the Fire Safety Act, which went through Parliament, and then was last year. That then came out, although it's still waiting to be fully enacted until guidance has been produced for it. Further amendments to building regulations. And then the draft safety bill, which is going to be the Building Safety Act, was announced last year on the 20th of July, not last year, in 2020 on the 20th of July. That process is still ongoing, and it's not due to be finished until about 2023, when we'll fully see what's happening. It's now going through the second reading and committee stage, and it's going back and forward from the House of Lords. So the Hackett review was carried out then after Grenfell, and that's Building a Safer Future, and it was an independent review of building regulations and fire safety. In the report, Dame Judith Hackett said that there is a need for a radical rethink of the whole system and how it works. This is most definitely not just a question of the specification of cladding systems, but of an industry that has not reflected and learned for itself, nor looked to other sectors. Okay, so the recommendations that came from the Hackett report and the Hackett review were intended to apply to new and existing high-rise buildings. All right, so that's above 18 metres or 10 stories and more. In some cases, however, the review suggests applying specific recommendations to a wider set of buildings. All right, so it's primarily focused on the high-rise to high-risk buildings. However, it may become more apparent that other buildings are going to be encompassed within this. And as we see, as we go through the presentation, there may be other buildings that will need to have some of these policies in place. So it may extend that scope. So the report suggests that the roles and responsibilities of those procuring, designing, constructing and maintaining buildings at that time were unclear. The package of regulations and guidance could be ambiguous and inconsistent. The processes that drove compliance within building safety with the requirements are weak and complex with poor record keeping and change of control. Competence across the system is patchy and product testing, labeling and marketing is opaque and insufficient. And to top all of that off, the voices of the residents would often go unheard. So what the Hackett review was hoping to do, or was intending to do, was tighten up a lot of the regulations and put in place a single streamlined regulatory route to oversee building standards. This is both prior to construction, so in the planning phase, during construction, and then on occupation as well. So it would then call for that new framework to create a more simple and effective mechanism for driving building safety, provide a stronger oversight of duty holders, and reassert the role of residents. So the recommendations of that report included a new regulatory framework for multi-occupancy, higher risk residential buildings that are 10 stories or more in height, a new joint competent authority comprising of local authority building standards, fire and rescue authorities, and the health and safety executive to oversee. So this is the first mention of this, of where the HSE is going to be involved. And that will become more apparent as we go through the presentation, that the health and safety executive are going to take a much more proactive role within the buildings than they have previously. And a better management of safety risks in these buildings through safety cases, and that's going to be across the entire life cycle of the property. Mandatory incident reporting mechanism, so new duty holders, roles and responsibilities, okay, which will more closely align to the construction design and management regulations. A series of robust gateway points to strengthen regulatory oversight. This is generally the case when in the planning phase and the construction phase. We'll see that a bit later on as well. Stronger change control processes. So there will be, when after the property has been built, so it's been planned, constructed, is then that handover between either the freeholder or the managing agents. Okay, there will be regulations in there to ensure that all of the information that you require is then passed from the constructors, from the designers, onto the people who will control it and will take up those duty holder positions. A single, more streamlined regulatory route to oversee building standards. Okay, so to ensure that building standards are being complied with, and also that they are they're stronger and that they're easier for everyone to comply with them. At the moment, you know, a lot of the places where we're talking guidance, or is this legislation? More rigorous enforcement duties or enforcement powers, a clear and identifiable duty holder with responsibility for building safety, delivering building safety as a system rather than by considering a series of competing or isolated objectives. All right. Once again, this will come in more apparent when we talk about things like the golden thread. A more effective testing regime with clearer labelling and product traceability. That's for the products that are actually used in the construction. And then it's the obligation to create a digital record for any new high-rise buildings from initial design, intent through to construction, and that includes any changes that occur throughout occupation as well. Once again, as I said previously, where we're talking about the golden thread of information on that. So as I said, Hackett's recommendations were the single streamlined regulatory route to oversee building standards, more rigorous enforcement powers, and then residents will be given access to essential fire safety information and improved fire risk assessments. Some of that from the bottom part, the improved fire risk assessments, comes from the Fire Safety Act, where they're now including, or they now should include, the external walls and any systems that are being installed on that. And then once the guidance has been produced is where you're looking at flat entry doors and how often those need to be inspected. Okay, and including with those flat entry doors are any of the communal fire doors that have been installed in the building. So anything on any service cupboards, any corridor fire doors, those still will require to be inspected. However, the regularity of that is still to come out from government. Okay, the golden thread. In the Hackett report, Dame Judith recommended a golden thread of good quality information. This is from when buildings were being designed to the construction phase when they were being built, and then afterwards when they're into occupation, so that they are then managed safely. The duties will be placed on those. These duties will be placed on those who commission a building work, participate in the design and construction process, and those who are responsible for managing structural and fire safety in the building once it is occupied. All right, so it's not just concentrating on the fire safety aspect, although that is the most high profile. It's also containing about the health and safety issues that are within the property as well. So if there are asbestos issues, if any of the O&M maintenance that needs to be carried out on any kind of plant equipment in there, lightning conductors, or even things like structural and stability. Okay, the people who have then been placed these responsibilities will be called duty holders during the design and construction phase. And once a building is occupied, that then becomes the accountable person. So they'll be responsible for coordinating the golden thread of state safety information and keeping the golden thread updated. They are also to ensure it's both accurate and accessible. If there are multiple accountable persons, then the principal accountable person will take the lead responsibility for the golden thread. When a building is being refurbished, this may involve both duty holders and the principal accountable person and any other accountable people as well, as many buildings will remain occupied during refurbishment. This will also be the case as if it's on a new build as well, where you have partial occupation. Okay, it's becoming common that buildings will have a partial occupation while construction on other floors is still being carried out. So that golden thread will still have all those different duty holders in place for those as well. So the golden thread will be created before building work starts, okay, and then it will be kept updated throughout the life of that building. Okay, so first of all, it will go through the design and construction, and then once it's completed, it will then become part of the accountable person's responsibility to ensure that for an occupied building. In cases where the building is in scope of the new design and construction regime, but not the occupation regime, okay, so that is buildings that have slightly different purpose, all right, so it would be hospitals, care homes, etc. We envisage that the golden thread will be handed to the responsible person under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005. More information will come out from government on that if that would affect you. Existing buildings that are in scope of the occupation regime, so talking about the golden thread, so any buildings that are within that scope, so they're high-risk buildings over 18 metres, they also need to have a golden thread of information. However, when these buildings were designed and constructed, they did not go through the gateways. We'll go through the gateways a bit later. All right, but there's a gateways 1, 2, and 3, which are all part of the planning process and the construction process before they are handed over to the accountable persons and they're ready for occupation. Therefore, the principal accountable person will be responsible for developing and coordinating the golden thread with input from any other accountable people and they will be responsible for maintaining and updating that for the respective parts of their building. So if you have more than one person occupying a building, if you also have commercial units as well, these need to have accountable people in there as well. So anyone who's got control of that building will need to put information into that golden thread. In design and construction and refurbishment, the golden thread should contain the information needed to demonstrate compliance with specified building regulations. That comes through on a new build from the through the gateways. Before it passes through each gateway, it must demonstrate that it has followed those building regulations. All right, and there are inspection regimes on there, and that's where the building regulator also gets involved. When the building is completed, this information will be handed over to the person responsible for the completed person. That's the principal accountable person. So once that building has been completed, okay, the construction work is finished, it's ready for handover to the responsible person or to the freeholder or their agents. Okay, all of this information needs to be passed to them. All right. So that's where the golden thread comes in. It starts off right at the beginning of the design process. It goes all the way through construction, going through the gateways until it is finally ready for handover. Then when it hands over to that accountable person, they have all the information they need. Okay, it's all kept in a pack. You've got that information. It can be, it's auditable. People can inspect it to ensure everything is in place. And you have that information should you require it in the future. It will then be added on as the building goes through its life. In occupied buildings, the golden thread should contain the information needed for the safety of the building and its residents. The golden thread will contain the information and documents produced for registration and certification, the safety case, which we'll go through in a bit, mandatory occurrence reporting, and then resident engagement as well. Once again, all of these will go through as we go on. For buildings going through prescribed refurbishment, the documents approved by the regulator under building control applications for building work in existing higher risk buildings will need to be stored within this golden thread. So whenever there is a new installation going within that existing building, this will need to be still go through these gateways to ensure that they are following the building regulations of the time. All right, and these requirements will be set out once everything has been finalised with the building safety bill. However, some of them for the new builds are already in place, as you'll see in a bit. Okay, the golden thread will have to be kept in a digital format. All right, at the moment there is no information on that, but that will be set out. All right, so it's to be there to ensure that it can be easily available for anyone who needs to see it. Okay, residents access to be able to view that golden thread. Residents will be provided with information about their building and have the right to request further information on their building from the person responsible. There will be regulations in the future as to what types of information can be provided. Okay, however, further guidance will be given on that, but some information will be provided to the residents. Okay, so the building safety bill, that was all that came from the Hackett review, and then she recommended that we have this golden thread in place for primarily for new buildings, but also for existing buildings. There is the acceptance that existing buildings will not have all of this documentation in place, depending on the age of the building. A lot of the times things have gone missing since the building was constructed, things like fire strategies. Okay, so there will have to be some guidance into how that will be dealt with. So on the Building Safety Bill, on the 5th of July 2021, the Secretary for Housing introduced the revised draft of the Building Safety Bill into the House of Commons. All right, the revised bill follows a 3-year scrutiny and a public consultation process. So it started around 2018. Okay, so 2017 we had the Grenfell fire, and then 2018 they started putting public consultation into what this building safety bill would do. So what kind of areas it should cover, and a lot of it once again came from the Hackett review, and represents a whole-scale reform of the building safety regime. In line with the recommendations that we went through previously with Dame Judith Hackett's 2018 independent review, the bill sets out a new regulatory regime aimed at ensuring the safety of residents in residential buildings. All right, and the bill is intended to cover England with selected provisions to be adopted in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. All right, what it's intended to do then is establish a building safety regulator to implement and oversee a stringent regime for higher risk buildings and drive improvements in building safety and performance standards in all buildings. It's to establish a legal regime to oversee higher risk buildings, ensure residents have a stronger voice in the system and establish additional protections for leaseholders in relation to financing remediation works, create a new homes ombudsman scheme, increase access to redress through the Defective Premises Act 1972, strengthen the obligations under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005, and provide a stronger and clearer framework for oversight of construction products. All right, the bill will affect developers, owners, managers, and occupiers of higher risk buildings, which are currently defined as buildings with at least 2 residential units and at least 18 metres in height. Initially, the Hackett review said was for 10 stories. However, the Building Safety Bill has slightly lowered that because of the differences where you've got different floors at different heights. Okay, so it's going to be around about 7 stories as well. Okay, so the implementation timeline for this. All right, initially went before Parliament in the 30th of June 2021 and then was introduced to the House of Commons on the 5th of July 2021. From September to October, it was in committee stage. And now it's going backwards and forwards between the House of Commons and the House of Lords at the moment. So there are new proposals coming out all the time. And as I said before, there's due to be a new proposal next week, which will primarily focus on leaseholders for this case. So there will be new information coming out and there will be changes to this as it goes through the system. So it's expected maybe to receive royal consent later this year. Okay, full changes made by December, hopefully, and then come into implementation in 2023. All right, so an overarching framework. All right, so which means how much of it will work and affect all of the relevant parties will ultimately be set out by separate secondary legislation. So it's an enabling act to allow secondary legislation to be brought in over the period of time when different matters arise or they need to put different things in to either strengthen some of the regulations that they've got in place. Okay, so it has the following parts. Part 1 is an overview of the bill, and the bill will change existing legislation, especially from the Building Act 1984. Sorry. Part 2 will establish the Building Safety Regulator within the HSE. Part 3 amends the Building Act 1984 to make the building safety regulations the local building control authority in relation to higher risk buildings in England. Part 4 defines and places duties on the accountable person in relation to building safety risks in higher risk residential buildings. And Part 5 is the provisions for the new ombudsman scheme. Okay, the Building Safety Regulator. As I said before, the proposed legislation, so the Building Safety Bill, seeks to create a new Building Safety Regulator as part of the HSE, as part of the Health and Safety Executive. Okay, prior to that, the Health and Safety Executive were involved. However, now they're becoming much more a part of the building once the building is also in occupation as well. So they have a role within the planning, the construction, and on the occupation. So this is what the Building Safety Regulator will do, is implement a new, more stringent regulatory regime for high risk residential buildings, be responsible for all regulatory decisions under the new regime during the design, construction, occupation and refurbishment of higher risk buildings, promote competence among industry professionals and regulators to raise standards in the design, construction and management of buildings, oversee performance systems of all buildings, so one regulator can provide guidance on building performance as well as building safety, ensuring that factors like countering climate change are factored into regulators' decisions, and introduce a new regime for the construction and management of high-rise buildings, as well as the new Homes Ombudsman and the Construction Products Regulator. So the Construction Products Regulator is, as we thought, there'll be a new regime for that testing and what products can be used where. The Building Regulator will also oversee the new requirements, which is the implementation of the new three-stage gateway at specific points at design, construction and completion phases to ensure that safety is considered at each and every stage of a building's construction. This will ensure that the regulatory requirements are checked in detail at each point. Although, as you will take over the building on occupation, the requirement to know what the Building Safety Regulator is doing and what the gateways provide you is important. So you know that when you take that building on occupation, you know what stages have been through, what gateways it's been through, and you know that it has been assessed at all those points. So you can be confident that when you take that building on, it is safe for you to do so. And it also provides that audit for you as well. So you know you have all the information on who built it, who inspected it, when it was inspected. So it proposes that golden thread of information. That gives it that accountability as it goes through from design, through construction, through occupation. Then on post-occupation, also that accountability where everyone knows at each point who has been doing what, okay, and it's all been put in and how many assessments have gone through, what safety assessments have been in place for it to go past those gateways and for it to go onto occupation and into post-occupation. All right, so it'll be a living document for that golden thread, and it will be, as we said before, it'll be digitally, all right, and so it's going to give you the most up-to-date information of a building on both fire safety and on the actual building safety of it as well. Okay, the regulator will require evidence that the relevant standards have been satisfied before they can pass through one gateway. So as you see here, they've got gateway 1, 2 and 3. So in gateway 1, then is the planning and submission, which does include a fire statement. The fire statement will give all the details of what will be in place in that building to ensure that it is safe. It's safe for fires, or fire safe before it's even gone into construction. So it's going to go through almost a fire strategy on there. It's not quite as in depth as that, but it is going to be a fire statement, all right, into what is going to be in place. This will then be assessed by the building regulator, by the Building Safety Regulator. Okay, and once it's been assessed and it's passed through there, it can then go on to gateway 2. And that's the deposit of full plans of construction. Deposit of full plans. Construction cannot begin until the Building Safety Regulator is satisfied that they have everything in place. They've thought of everything, it's all within the plans, and they know, yes, that building can be built to that specification. Okay, it needs to be built to that specification now, and it will be assessed throughout that construction phase to ensure that it is being done so. Once it's gone through gateway 2, onto gateway 3, and that's the completion. This will include demonstration that the works have been completed to building regulations. As we said before, gateway 2, to go through gateway 2, they had to have those plans. All right, the Building Safety Regulator had to be happy that the specifications that the building was going to be built to, was going to be constructed to, everything was in place for that. So when it comes to gateway 3, the building has been completed, but they should have also demonstrated during that completion phase, during that construction phase, that at all times they have completed everything to building regulations. So this will require assessments and inspections throughout. All of this documentation will then be collated and be part of that golden thread of information. That will then be in that pack, in that digital pack, that will then be handed on to the accountable person. Throughout that phase, then, throughout each gateway, then parties will be required to show that safety risks have been considered at the earliest stage of planning. All right, at each point, there will safety risks at each point for when the building is in occupation, they are being considered at all times. A building assurance certificate will need to be obtained from the Building Safety Regulator in respect of all high-risk buildings and occupation, whether existing or new. And then there will be existing powers, or will have the power to prosecute as well, because of coming from HSE, they've got those greater powers. Okay, accountable person in. During the initial report, Dame Judith Hackett found that there was no requirement for a person or entity to be clearly responsible for the fire and structural safety of a high-rise residential building. She identified that the powers of local authorities under the Housing Act allow them to act against individual landlords and leaseholders on fire safety risks, but do not require someone to take overall responsibility for the safety of the whole building in every case. In her final report, Dame Judith recommended that a clear and identifiable duty holder with overall responsibility for building safety during occupation and maintenance was needed, and that they should be responsible for maintaining the fire and structural safety of the whole building. Her report was clear that buildings must be thought of as an integrated system and managed in a way that is consistent of whole building approach. So as we went before, there can be numerous accountable persons, all right? So there will be the principal accountable person, and then there may be other accountable people who are taking control of other parts of that block. But there will be one overall accountable person in charge of that. That may be, it may well be the landlord, the freeholder, or it could be managing agents who are looking after that block for those people. Those accountable persons can be held to account if they breach their duties. All right, so if they do fail to comply with their duties, the Building Safety Regulator will be given a suite of tools and powers available to ensure compliance. Initially, that is thought to be that the regulator will work with the accountable person to rectify any potential non-compliance. Right, so it's not going to come down straight away, but they'll work with everyone to ensure that that compliance can be achieved before they have to go into any of the hammer of any kind of criminal prosecutions. However, that could come in place. So there may be compliance notices, criminal prosecutions, and then there may be further measures that may be taken against the building to ensure that either the safety obligations are met or that they have to be met in the future. As I said before, there could be multiple accountable people. In some complex residential buildings, all right, it may not be easily possible to identify a single accountable person for the entire building. Where there are multiple accountable persons, each will have responsibility for managing risk within their areas of responsibility. Okay, however, one person will still have to be assigned as a principal accountable person. All right. So when they have a whole building, they have to support the whole building approach. All right, where there are multiple accountable persons. All right. So when they are carrying out their duties, they have to ensure that they cooperate and coordinate with each other. That will then, if it is a complicated building, it will then give the best outcome and deliver the best building safety to their residents. Okay, so at the moment then, as it's going through the Parliament, I'm going to identify a statutory definition that identifies the accountable persons for occupied high-risk buildings. All right, as I said before, the accountable persons are landlords, freeholders who are in charge of repairing of that, or they're in charge of that building. They could be an individual, a partnership, or a corporate body. Common parts of that building will include the structure, exterior, and any other part provided for the common use of the building. All of these high-risk buildings will have at least one clearly identifiable, accountable person with that. Okay, so the building safety manager. This is another duty holder which is coming from the Building Safety Bill. All right, an accountable person for an occupied high-risk building will have duty under the bill to appoint a building safety manager for their building. The main role of the building safety manager is to manage the high-risk building on a day-to-day basis in accordance with the building safety case and provide information as required to the new building safety regulator. The accountable person who will employ this or will appoint this person can appoint an external individual or a company to act as the building safety manager for their higher risk buildings. They do not need to directly employ a building safety manager in-house. All right, so you can use someone else to do it. There are currently at the moment courses for building safety managers. We've had a few people here who have done a course, just finished just after Christmas. So as it is going through, all right, as the bill is going through, there will become more and more people qualified to do that. All right, so the guidance has been produced for what kind of competencies are required for it. All right, and those courses are being provided now by providers. During the pre-legislative scrutiny of the Building Safety Bill by Parliament, it was recognised that many accountable persons would need the support of an external partner to perform the role of the Building Safety Manager. All right, there is that realisation that this to work as an accountable person, or to make that work effectively, other people will need to be involved, right? Because that day-to-day managing of the building safety, all right, can't just be done by one person. So someone else has to be delegated that responsibility. All right, so those accountable people will get that support of that external body or that building safety manager. Being able to appoint an external organisation will be particularly important for many accountable persons, all right, given the wide range of skills, competencies and capabilities that are required for the building safety manager, all right, in order for them to effectively perform their role. Where an organisation is acting as a building safety manager, they must nominate an individual as the lead point of contact and responsibility for the building. The accountable person will need to notify the regulator of their chosen building safety manager, which will ensure that they meet the required competency standards. So the building safety regulator, as part of the HSE, will monitor all of the competency standards that are required, and they will check to see that those appointed building safety managers do fulfill those competencies. A higher risk building, which has just gone through, so ready for completion, cannot be occupied until a competent building safety manager has been appointed to the satisfaction of the regulator. So that will be part of the gateways as well, to ensuring that that's in place. What does the building safety manager do? All right, it hasn't been specifically put out in the bill as yet. However, all right, they will be concerned with the planning, managing and monitoring of activity required so that the new duties of the accountable persons are complied with. All right, so those functions will include designing and implementing a suitable and appropriate inspection regime for the high-risk building. So that will be the property inspections, the inspections of any fire safety equipment, such as alarm systems, sprinkler systems that have been installed to ensure that the operation and occupancy of the building is in compliance with the building safety case, which we'll go into just slightly later. Notifying the accountable person if the building safety risk assessment and safety case are no longer valid or sufficient. All right, so if there's been a major change within that building, the accountable person needs to be notified as soon as they can to ensure that the building regains compliance, and then maybe a new risk assessment or safety case needs to be produced to ensure that it mirrors what that building has. All right, and then they will also inform them any reasonable steps that need to be taken to prevent the occurrence of any kind of major incident. Working with the responsible person where appropriate to ensure that fire risk assessments are carried out in accordance with the management system, proactively providing challenges to assumptions and observations within the assessments. Right, so they'll check the assessments, work with the assessors as well, but also will challenge anything that the assessor has put down to ensure, all right, that they're following the building safety case, right? But then they will also challenge that assessment. Oversee reactive repairs and plan maintenance on the property, ensuring that all contractors are competent. Works are carried out in accordance with the building safety case, and all remedial issues affecting safety and compliance are completed, and ensure that proper controls are in place. A very important part they will also have is the resident engagement. So they engage residents in the safe management of their building through a resident engagement strategy. All right, and that includes routes of escalation for resident concerns and complaints relating to safety and ensuring that residents are complying with their safety responsibilities. Ensure all building and maintenance and compliance safety information is up to date and stored correctly on systems that are fit for purpose. All right. This not only maintains the golden thread of information that we were going through prior to, all right, so it's stored in a digital fashion as well to ensure that throughout the life of that building, that chain of information, that thread of information is kept. So it's that living document. But it's also if there are any kind of enforcement agencies that are inspecting the building, the building safety manager will have all that information to hand so that he can pass it on to those enforcing authorities, be that the HSE with their new role as the building safety regulator, or the fire authorities, the fire brigade, if they are carrying out an inspection of that building for fire safety. Supply information and documentation to building safety regulator on behalf of the accountable person. So if there is that request of documentation, the accountable person has delegated that responsibility to the building safety manager to hold all that documentation to ensure that it is all in place. They've got everything there so that if they are requested for information, the accountable person is confident that the building safety manager can pass on the required information in order to adhere to that compliance and to ensure compliance. The competencies and capabilities, all right, so there is a expert panel, okay, that is in place, that's developing that competency framework, all right. It's due to conclude early this year, all right, but there are already training providers who are providing courses for building safety managers. Once they have qualified, though, there will always be that need for continuous professional development as well, okay, and ensuring that they are keeping up with and developing best practice while they're doing it. The accountable person then will appoint the building safety manager. All right, so it is their responsibility to appoint that. And they will also have to have high level trust and confidence in their building safety managers as well, right? Because they're delegating that responsibility. The accountable person needs to know that who they've appointed in that position is running the safety of the building correctly and ensuring compliance on there. They will play an essential role in maintaining the safety and compliance of the buildings, and they'll also help the accountable person comply with their duties. When selecting a building safety manager, accountable persons may wish to consider whether the candidates and organisations have some of these things in place. Access to a broad range of building safety related disciplines and capabilities. All right, so that includes things like fire risk assessments, building regulations, auditing, fire engineering, any information management and resident engagement strategies already in place, or have got those processes in place before you appoint them. An ability to support the accountable person to comply with their duties. For example, supporting the development or supporting the development of the building safety case, or then refreshing it as and when they need to. And then a secure, resilient, centralised and efficient technology platform to support this. Everything has got to be kept in that digital pack to comply with the building safety regulator and to comply with the golden thread of information. So all of this needs to be kept digitally, all right, so it's easily available and it's stored in place. And then an ability to deliver a tailored and risk-based management model for each higher risk building. Okay, the safety case. Briefly chat about the safety case. Okay, what the safety case really is that plan for the building. It could be viewed as something like when you're planning to go on holiday. So it's got everything you would need to take with you. So it's that plan, that itinerary that you're gonna follow when you're on holiday, or what you're gonna go and see where you're on it. Okay, so fires and serious structural incidents in high-rise residential buildings are quite rare, but when they do happen, the consequences for people in and around the building can be catastrophic. A single incident can affect many people in their homes. You've got many people living in one block, so a single incident within there is obviously going to affect everyone else within there. Okay, so the safety case then is all the information you use to manage the risk of fire spread. Okay, so go through that in a minute. Okay, it's all that information you use to manage that. The risk of fire spread, the structural safety of the building, and some of this information show you how the building is preventing that fire spread, what systems you have in place to prevent that fire spread, and what systems you have in place to prevent that structural failure. All right, and if they do happen, how you are limiting those consequences. For example, fire alarm systems, you've got sprinkler systems installed, you have O&M maintenance going on the building to ensure that everything is working correctly. All right, and that's all provided in a safety case report. All right, so the safety case report is a document that summarizes your safety case. It identifies the building's major fire and structural hazards, and it shows how the accountable person and building safety manager, how you as a body are managing those risks as far as you can. It should give the reader, whoever's reading that, confidence they have identified your building's major fire and structural risks and are managing and controlling them. Okay, so the safety case principles then, as part of the new regime, all right, and it's among other things, it's to make sure that all buildings in scope in England are designed and constructed to be safe and of a good standard. All right, and then once again, they're operated and managed in the correct way, all right, and also to ensure that they are safe to be occupied. So to meet those requirements, you will need to produce a safety case report. Okay, and with the safety case report, it shouldn't be too long. Okay, so they've through the consultation process, they're looking at about 10 pages or so. Okay, there are other documents that are going to be involved within the safety case that will be longer, which will go into more detail on this. But the safety case is just that initial snapshot of the building and of the safety, the risks that are involved in that building, and of what is in place to eliminate those risks or to limit those risks. Okay, so the kind of things you're looking at is obviously the full postal address, a photograph, all right, current and past duty holders, so you've got that accountability throughout, all right, but it should be succinct as you're going through it. And it should allow the reader to understand the major hazards associated with the building. As I said before, what measures are in place to manage, control, and mitigate the risks from these hazards. All right, that includes any safety management policies that you have in place as well. All right, so it's where how many inspections you make of any kind of safety equipment. So are you carrying out weekly fire alarm checks? Are those being logged? Do you do monthly emergency light checks? How are those being logged? Who carries them out? All of that information is held, but your safety case will refer to that. How those measures are maintained, so how you're maintaining it. So once again, that's like on the maintenance schedule for it. What checks you make to make sure they're going, and how you keep it up to date. It's going to have all of the information, so you're now going to have floor plans within the size, photographs, and what the flats are like. It will also have with it any facade and structure information, particularly for existing buildings. It may need to require any EWS1 certificate if it had one carried out, or under the new guidance, if it has had a fire risk appraisal of external walls. They would make up part of your safety case, because that is the kind of information that someone who's looking as a snapshot for the safety of the building needs to know. This information could also be available for any kind of fire risk assessor as well who's going to go in, although the fire risk assessment will be part of the safety case as well, or it will be referred to in there. So it can be attached to it to ensure that. I'm sure 10 pages, most fire risk assessments are more than that, but you would need that attachment in there. Once again, compliance records, all right, everything is attached to that. All right, and what it does then is draws together a clear description of the building. All right, it allows whoever is formulating it to think about the major accidents that could involve fire. All right, it's predominantly fire, but it's also talking about structural safety as well that could affect it. and then it can allow you to, the accountable person, to put down what measures they've got in place, all right, in order to minimize that impact on people if things do go wrong. Okay, so you are thinking, what kind of emergency evacuation plan has the building in place should the worst happen? Okay, what kind of measures have we got in place in there? So fire alarm system, have we got rising mains in order for that? Have the fire brigade or the emergency responders got good enough access into that building should they have to evacuate the building, and should they have to put out a fire? It's to set out what measures you put in place, how they'll work when required, and then it allows anybody who's got responsibility for that to think about the safety management system that they've got in place. All right, and as I said, it shouldn't be too long on that. For any new builds then, or a major refurbishment that's going on, they would also have to have within there or attached there the fire statement, dates and outcomes of the gateway approval, and then a safety case reviews and investment records as that goes on. All right, so you would have those things in place, so it does provide that golden thread. Finally then is resident engagement. As I said before, there needs to be a strategy for resident engagement throughout the life of the building. Once they've taken on occupation, all right, and this is going to be part of the, generally will be part of the building safety manager's duties, all right. They have that duty to residents to inform them of what the safety principles are within that building, all right. Those residents will also have the right then to ask the questions and to receive information about the life-saving measures that are in place and how those are being complied with. All right, so the resident engagement is a vital part of the building safety manager's role. How they do that, there are a number of different ways, whether they do it by meetings, they can have letters, they can put out notes, they can put out fact sheets, they can do it by emails and phone calls, etc. But that will be part of the building safety manager's role, is to ensure that all of the residents are informed of anything to do with safety for the building, okay, to keep them informed on that, all right, and then to engage with them, to empower them, to give them that feeling, all right, yes, we do have a role within this, all right, so it is still a vital part of what the building safety manager will do. All right, and that building safety manager will also have the duty then to ensure that the accountable person knows what the outcomes of that resident engagement is. And I think any questions on that, I think I spoke for enough now for the moment. Okay, let me just a couple of questions on there on the chat as well. Okay, so first question then is, what criteria are used to decide who the main accountable person is for a building, e.g. in a typical situation where freeholder owns a building, who then appoints a manager and agent, who is or should be the main accountable person? Really on that is we'll have to wait for further guidance on that. We'll have to wait for a bit of guidance on that to see where that comes from. All right, as I said before, it's still going through Parliament, so it's still going on there. Who is going to be the principal contractor? It may be that if it's the managing agents will be an accountable person, but then the principal accountable person may still be the freeholder overall, as they will hold the ultimate duty of responsible. So the responsible person is still going to be a responsible person as well. Okay, so this accountable person is another duty holder on top of that. But until further legislation and further guidance comes out on that, that's all I've got on that, I'm afraid, Chris. And once again, for the second one, I think they're fairly similar to the third one as well. Very clear how this will work for new buildings, but most buildings under management and fall into scope or existing. How much leeway will they be dealing with missing or unattainable information required for the golden forgiven passage of time, changes of ownership, etc. Okay, we sometimes seeing at the moment, but this is particularly when we're talking on fire safety. Now, obviously, as buildings get older, those documentations go missing. They go missing from there, and it doesn't get passed on to the responsible person. We have seen it over the last few months or so, where authorities are asking for things like fire strategies on existing buildings. Now, to get a fire strategy for an existing building is very difficult unless you have the original one, right? And there may be a requirement for those fire strategies to be a new one to be done. All right. So at the moment, and again, we're talking in a bit of hypotheticals, because until everything has been finalised, all right, we don't know how they're going to do that for the golden thread, whether or not that golden thread of information can then be started from when that accountable person has taken ownership of that or has taken that responsibility of that building. It can then start again, because for 30 years previously, they have no more information. All right, and I think that's the second. For the third one, the safety case will be required for existing high-risk buildings. Yes. Okay, so you will require a safety case for that, because you can provide a safety case for a existing building. All right, because those principles are still the same thing. So when you're doing that, is what kind of systems you have in place. What are the risks of the building? So your fire risk assessment, your health and safety risk assessment will give you those risks, and it will also give you how you can mitigate against those risks as well. All right, so you can have a look through it, formulate your safety case with what measures you've already got in place, all right, and then treat that as the living document. Resident engagement will be mandatory for existing high-risk buildings as well. So that resident engagement piece of the building safety manager, all right, they will still have to put that in place for existing buildings. All right, that's not just for new ones. Just have a look, see what. Responsibility for creating a safety case. Okay, so that will be generally it'll be the building safety manager who will produce the safety case. However, the accountable person is in overall responsibility of it. All right, so the accountable person can delegate that to the building safety manager to ensure that they fill out the safety case, but then that accountable person has that responsibility. Will the government portal will there be a government portal where safety records golden thread can be uploaded? Okay, at the moment that's going to be something that the buildings or the accountable person will have to have themselves, right? So the building safety manager may have it with a system in place on there. Okay, the building safety regulator will have information as well, all right, but you will also need to hold those records yourself to ensure that when on handover, you can hand those documents over. Once again, things may change within the time frame. I forgot. How will insurance company fit in with reporting faults to the building safety system? I'm not sure how insurance companies will be able to do that, but within the building safety systems, they will have those compliances in, or you should have those checks in place to ensure that you are carrying that out. So, for instance, if emergency lights are out, fire alarms are not working, those will be in place. But on the insurance side, I don't know about. Accountable person, I believe, must. Are we gone?
Oh, sorry, James, I'm just jumping back in because we're nearly out of time.
Okay, yeah.
Just so everybody knows as well, James will also be joining us alongside Andrew Ball from Foresight at the Leasehold Conference on the 23rd of March, where they're going to be hosting a workshop on preparing a building safety case. So if anyone's interested, they want more information on that, then yeah, feel free to go online to book your tickets and join us there. That would be brilliant. James, I can try and I see there's a couple more questions there that we haven't managed to get through, so I can forward them on to you, and then if you want to follow up with anyone directly.
Yeah, I will. The accountable person holding a legal title, I will check on for Andre, and then I can get back to you on that. I will check on that for them, yeah.
Yeah, there's only I think there's only a couple of general more questions, but I'll forward them on, and then if you have time to speak to people individually, then great. Otherwise, I think that's helped a lot of people today. It was really informative. Thank you so much for your time, James.
Thank you.
I will be, as I mentioned, sending the recording out to everyone later today with a copy of the slides. So hopefully that will be useful for everyone. Other than that, thank you all for joining us today. Please do keep a lookout on the News on the Block website for more of our upcoming knowledge bank, and hopefully we'll see you all at Leasehold. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, James.